Hello, everybody. Welcome in to the Basketball Bulletin. I'm Trevor Lane. Happy to have you all here. Thought we would take a little bit of time here mid-August and talk about some of the latest news around the NBA, including, of course, Jonathan Kaminga, Josh Giddey. You got that Lakers trade rumor that's floating around out there. We need to talk about that. The schedule release is going to be coming up. I believe the schedule is going to be released in full on Thursday, but we've already seen some stuff trickle out in terms of what next season's schedule is going to look like. So lots of stuff to talk about. Happy to have y'all here. If you're coming in from X, you're coming in from YouTube. If you've not subscribed yet to the Basketball Bulletin, please make sure you do hit that subscribe button. So as I said, lots of stuff for us to get into. Appreciate all of you guys. Yeah, I just wrapped up a Discord chat. That was a lot of fun. Had a good time going over, and we talked Lakers specifically over there. Here I'll be talking NBA in general, but lots of stuff for us to get into here. And by the way, since this is August, you guys have anything else you want to talk about in the chat? You want to ask? We can talk a little bit about the channel. I do have on here that we'll talk a little bit about that, kind of how this all is moving forward and all that kind of stuff. You guys can fire off questions, comments about any of that as well. Ask me anything, and let's get going here. But first thing I want to get into is this news that Jonathan Kaminga prefers the qualifying offer over what the Golden State Warriors are currently offering him. Maybe not a surprise at this point that Kaminga would prefer that, but obviously that is the threat from Kaminga, that he can take the qualifying offer and leave the Golden State Warriors for nothing next season. Now, this was in ESPN that they were talking about this. It was in an ESPN article. I believe it was Anthony Slater that mentioned that Kaminga still prefers right now to take the qualifying offer. So the danger for the Warriors and any of these teams that have players that are restricted free agents is that they could potentially pick up their qualifying offer, play at below market value for 1 year, and then potentially be lost for nothing the next season because they would hit unrestricted free agency. So in the case of, say, Jonathan Kaminga, I'm putting this up on the screen here for everybody. In the case of Jonathan Kaminga, he could play out his 1 year deal as a restricted free agent, would have a no trade clause, and then leave in free agency next season, and the Warriors would be left with nothing. Josh Giddey is in a similar spot. We'll talk about him in a minute. Cam Thomas is probably the most likely of these RFAs to just pick up his qualifying offer, since reportedly there's reports that Kaminga is being offered north of 20 million, something like 45 million over 2 years with a team option on the second year and the requirement that Kaminga waives his de facto or implied no trade that would come with that type of deal. He does not like that. And that's the reporting from ESPN today, is that Kaminga looks at a deal like that that's incredibly team friendly and says, no, I don't. I would rather take the qualifying offer and just bet on myself than do that. Now, does he ultimately, do any of these guys want to take the qualifying offer? No. These guys, what they would like to do is they would like to get their long-term deals locked up. Golden State, though, wants to be able to trade Jonathan Kaminga. So that's where this is currently sitting. The Warriors want to be able to trade Kaminga, and Kaminga is at a point where he would rather just pick up his qualifying offer than take what the Warriors currently have on the table. In fact, here it is from ESPN. Everything sits in the same spot it did 10 days ago. The Warriors have not upped their offer, and Kaminga is telling those close to him that the $8 million, $7.9 million qualifying offer is more appealing than $45 million over 2 years from the Warriors with a team option on the second year and having to give up his no trade clause or his implied no trade. So something has to give before the October 1st deadline. Again, though, the deadline's not until October 1st. So a lot of time for them to work through these things. But that's pretty clear that Jonathan Kaminga is saying, look, if you don't up your offer, I'm taking the qualifying offer. And I could walk for nothing next season. Now, could he re-sign with the Warriors after next summer? Sure, he could. And it's also a gamble on his part, because if he doesn't trust the Warriors right now to use him in a way that's beneficial for his career, does he trust the Warriors to, going into what would be a contract year for him next season, to use him in a way that would allow him to show out and get the kind of deal that he wants next summer? That's why he's stuck in such a tough spot. That's why the Warriors have done everything they can to shut down the potential of him going to Sacramento or Phoenix, because they want Kaminga to feel like he has to take the Warriors offer, not to hear, oh, you've got 90 million from Phoenix out there. You've got 60 plus million from Sacramento out there. This is the Warriors trying to use their influence, the Kaminga camp trying to use their influence as well. And this is just a big mess. But if nothing changes, Kaminga's pretty clearly put it out there. Hey, If nothing changes here, I'm taking the qualifying offer, and there's a good chance you're losing me for nothing next summer. So it's going to be fascinating to see where this ultimately lands with Jonathan Kaminga and the Golden State Warriors. Josh Giddey, there's also a little bit on that. The Bulls reportedly don't want to go above 20 million for Josh Giddey, who wants more like 30 million. I ultimately think they may meet in the middle and we see something around, say, 25 million. Do we see something land there? At that point, if you're Josh Giddey and you're getting like 25 million bucks, and if it's not the situation with Kaminga where it's a 2-year deal with a team option on the second year and you have to waive your implied no trade, if it's 3 years 75 million and you're Josh Giddey and you were really hoping to get 3 years 90, well, is $15 million of a difference enough of a risk? And $15 million is a lot of money, but is that enough of a gap to take the risk of playing for your qualifying offer and potentially getting injured? Right. And that's if you're an agent and you're talking to your players, that's the risk reward analysis you have to have here. If Josh Giddey says, I want 30 a year, they're offering 25, that's too much of a gap on a 3-year deal. I'm not willing to do that. I want that 15 million. Look, $15 million is a lot of money, but if he goes out next season and blows his knee out, then what's he getting? Then what happens with his career? $75 million is still life-changing money. If the Bulls are committing long-term and saying, maybe we don't reach the value that you want, but we want you here. We want you to be a Chicago Bull. That's a completely different situation than what Jonathan Kaminga is dealing with, where he's on a team that doesn't really want him that much. Well, some in the Warriors front office do want him, but he doesn't feel like they're going to use him the right way. He feels like they're holding back his career. That's a very different calculation when you're figuring out the risk versus reward. If you're Jonathan Kaminga and you think, man, the Warriors will not let me be the player I can be. Maybe you think it's better for me to take 8 million rather than play for 22, 23, whatever it would end up being, 22 million. It's better off for me long-term to play out this one season, go get the ability to go wherever I want to go, and then I can become an all-star level player. And then I'm getting a max contract offer, and I can never get to that level with the Warriors. If that's the thinking for Jonathan Kaminga, his situation is very different than Josh Giddey. And by the way, we've talked about a double sign and trade between those two, and it does make some sense. And there is some reporting that the Golden State Warriors, had they had the opportunity to take Josh Giddey in the draft that year, would have done so. I believe it was 2021? I believe it was. But had they had the ability to select Josh Giddey, they would have done so ahead of Kaminga. But Giddey was taken one spot ahead of them by the Oklahoma City Thunder. And so they weren't able to get him. So I think there is real interest in Josh Giddey. And if something made sense from the Warriors side, they would be open to swapping Jonathan Kaminga for Josh Giddey. But the problem is you've got base year compensation on both sides of that, which means Kaminga for the Warriors only counts for about half of what his true salary is for the team that he'd be going to. And that puts the Warriors in a situation where they would essentially have to make it a 3-team deal and throw in like Buddy Hield or something like that. So they're not taking back more salary than they're sending out. And in that scenario, that's something the Warriors are simply not willing to do. They don't want to sacrifice Buddy Hield just to deal with the base year compensation situation from Jonathan Kaminga. So that's where that's at. Right now, we're still in that staring contest, but interesting. The Bulls don't want to go a bit above 20 million for Giddey. Giddey wants 30. I still think that's a situation that ultimately gets resolved. The Kaminga one is certainly the more contentious. And then I think what Cam Thomas thinks of himself as a player compared to what the Nets think of him and what a number of other NBA teams think of him is so vastly different that I think if anybody's really going to take the qualifying offer, it's Cam Thomas. He's just going to say, no, F you. I'm going to go prove it. I'm going to go prove that I'm not a sixth man gunner, a high volume guy. Instead, I am truly a 24 point per game, legit scorer, secondary creator, all of that. I am a starter because the pay scales between those two different things are so vastly different. A sixth man scorer off the bench just doesn't have nearly as much value in today's NBA as a locked in 20 plus point per game scorer that can also create. So Cam Thomas wants to prove he's the latter. The NBA right now feels like he's the former. So Cam Thomas makes the most sense to just pick up his qualifying offer and say, hey, I'm going to go prove everybody wrong. All right, let me get to some of your questions, some of your comments here. Let's see what you guys have. Again, if you haven't subscribed yet to the Basketball Bulletin, make sure you do. By the way, we opened up the store. I believe Donnie got it sorted. There was showing some different prices on things there, but I'm hoping that that's all sorted out now. But we did open up the Basketball Bulletin store. I was already taking suggestions from people on what kind of merch you guys want to see. Make sure if you guys do have something that you're looking to see from us, that you do let us know. Fire it off on some of the video comments. You can fire it off in the chat right now. But we did open up the store for the Basketball Bulletin. This is the time of year when we're going to be working on kind of revamping some of those things. I'm working on getting a new header built for the YouTube channel page. A little, kind of housekeeping stuff like that is the type of stuff that we do here in August. All right, let's go here. Does New Orleans show Zion skinny Luka and say lock in? I mean, is it peer pressure to show Zion Williamson skinny Luka and say, hey, if Luka can do it, you can too. What are you doing? I don't know. Like, if that's going to get the result, great. I do think that Zion, we've been talking about it for years, but if Zion is ever going to lock in and really get his weight to where he needs it to be, like, it should be happening now. Frankly, it should have happened already, particularly because it's not like Luka was suffering. He obviously got injured last season, but it's not like Luka was suffering a bunch of injuries where you can specifically say, oh, it's just because he's too heavy. Because Luka is not, even when Luka is lighter, it's not like he is going at high speeds, right? It's not like he's this explosive leaper. Whereas Zion Williamson, you look at how fast he is, how quickly he can stop and start and change directions. By the way, I think Luka really does a nice job of decelerating and accelerating. And that's part of what allows him to keep defenders off balance, but it's not the same, not anywhere close to the same level of explosiveness. So a few extra pounds on Luka in terms of injury risk wise, I'm not a doctor, but I would have to imagine the injury risk would be much greater on Zion to have extra weight on your knees, on your joints, on everything when you are flying through the air. Luka is not going to be skying to throw down dunks where his head's at the rim. That's not what Luka is going to do. So the risk factor is going to be higher for a guy like Zion to carry the extra weight on him because you're adding that extra impact of an extra, whatever it is, 20, 30 pounds, whatever it is that Zion has got on him. I do think that while there's been optimism in the past, you've got a new GM in place in Joe Dumars. I do think if we're ever going to see, just like if we're ever going to see Luka really locked in fitness-wise, the same will be true for Zion Williamson. This is, he's an incredible player, and it pains me that he's not been able to stay on the floor to the degree that you would hope. I mean, you look at the number of games played over the course of his career, how many seasons he's missed. I mean, 70 games played is great 2 seasons ago. 61 games played is great. 3 seasons before that? But he's also missed an entire season and also played 24, 29, and 30 games. Absolutely brutal. Absolutely brutal. And he is an incredible, very unique talent. And so I hope that we do get to a point where Zion Williamson can get healthy, get in shape, and stay in shape. And I hope that allows him to stay on the floor. It's possible that his body is just not made to do that stuff. It's possible. And I hope that's not the case. Some of these guys, though, we see it in the NFL too, where you're just like, man, this guy just cannot stay healthy. Maybe his body's just not made to play NFL football. You've got those guys who've just been crushed by injury after injury after injury after injury. We talk about like Ken Walker in Seattle, Jonathan Brooks in Carolina. I mean, my God, we barely even seen him on the field after being a relatively high draft pick a few years ago. I hope that's not the path Zion ultimately goes down, where we just say, man, his body just does not want to play NBA basketball. All right, let's see what else we've got here. Would you like to see KCP back for Gabe and Maxey? Okay, so there was that rumor that's going around about the Lakers, Gabe Vincent and Jared Vanderbilt, that the Lakers had the opportunity to trade those guys, and then they chose not to. And I could say, I've talked about it a little bit on X. I put it on Lakers Nation as well. There's nothing that in the reporting that's out there, is from Sean Devaney, that explained what the Lakers would be getting back or what the price would be to move those players. So just to address that real quick, I I wouldn't jump to the conclusion. I know a lot of Lakers fans did, but I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that, oh, the Lakers blew it by not trading, um, by not trading Vando, by not trading Gabe Vincent, when we don't know what any of those deals would have actually looked like. For example, I mentioned the Brooklyn Nets. They're one of the few teams that have cap space. If the Brooklyn Nets called up the Lakers and the Lakers said, hey, we'll give you our 2031 first unprotected if you'll take Gabe Vincent back, I'm sure the Nets would be more than happy to do that. So should the Lakers do that, though? No, of course not. That'd be crazy. But could that also count as they had the opportunity to move Gabe Vincent? Yeah, they did. They just didn't like the price. A lot of teams find themselves with opportunities to do something, but didn't like the price. Would the Lakers have preferred to have kept Jordan Goodwin? Yes, they would have preferred to have kept Jordan Goodwin, but the price to do so was too high. The price to move other contracts off their books so they could keep Jordan Goodwin was too high. So they ultimately made the decision that the pain of waiving Jordan Goodwin was going to hurt less than the pain of the move they would have to make in order to keep Jordan Goodwin. Those are decisions that teams make all the time. Now, KCP for Gabe and Maxey, that's pure expirings. And that's where skill set wise, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, sure, would be a great fit for the Lakers. He's our old friend, obviously. He's been a Laker, won a championship as a Laker. But I think if you're the Lakers, before you're going to use your two biggest expiring contracts on, or your two most movable, I should say, expiring contracts, they're not the biggest. Rui's is bigger, but and technically I guess LeBron's is the biggest. But if you are going to use those two expiring contracts, Gabe, Maxey, those guys are $22.5 million in expiring money. If you're going to use those to go get Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, you need to know that, number one, is that the move that's going to put you over the top? Is that going to move that's going to really set you on a course to win a championship? And number two, is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope a positive value? Because if he's not, then you don't want to do this. Look, there's a reason why 4 firsts went back from the Orlando Magic to the Memphis Grizzlies. And it wasn't all because of Desmond Bane. In part, it was because Kentavious Caldwell-Pope didn't have a very good season last year, and it was seen as a negative value with that long-term money. So if you're the Lakers and you're going to give up not just expirings, but also financial flexibility, because he's got that player option for the next season at $21 million, that means you're going to have less optionality next summer, assuming that KCP picks up that contract as well. So you have to factor all of that in. In a vacuum, if you said, should the Lakers turn Gabe Vincent and Maxi Kleber, who, by the way, had an awesome windmill dunk, into Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, you go, yeah, KCP was awesome. But we have to remember, that's $21 million more on your books. You have to assume he picks up that option next summer. That might matter when we're talking about what happens with Austin Reeves' contract, that what happens with LeBron. That can definitely change what options you have available to you. And then, do you believe that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is a positive value on that contract or not? And do you think that he will ultimately be the guy that's going to help put you over the top? Because if the answer is no to any of those things, you're better off keeping the powder dry and waiting until the right move comes along that doesn't come with all of those negatives. So that's the big picture decision-making process, because the easy knee jerk is to say, KCP defends, he shoots threes. Yes, that's what the Lakers need. Go get him. But there's a bigger picture that has to be considered. For example, should the Lakers have given up a future first-round pick to go trade for Nick Claxton? Maybe. I mean, is that the worst value? No. And the Lakers needed a center? Okay, go get it done. Oh, but wait. Had you done that, then you probably are not going to get DeAndre Ayton, because he's not going to push to get bought out unless there's a starting job available with the Lakers. And so that's where all this kind of mattered, right? It's not just in a vacuum, what is the value of this deal? It's, what does this mean for your future moves as well? And there's a much bigger picture that all this has to be looked at. Dennis said, opportunity cost is more of an excuse, so you can continue to kick the can down the road. I know there's a lot of fans that feel that way about a lot of teams, and that's not just a Lakers thing. You have an excuse to not make a trade. This has happened for the last few years. I would ask, what's the trade that's there for them right now? What's the trade? And this is true, again, for any team. It doesn't have to be the Lakers. Any fans of a team that feel like my team didn't do enough, What's the trade that's available to them right now that they should do, that they can do? Because the assumption is always that, oh, the team's got to trade. The team, they've got a move that they can make. I know it. I know there's a great deal on the table. I can't speak to every team in the NBA, but I can speak specifically to the Lakers. If there is a trade available that they think will put them over the top, they will make that move. They will do it. I promise you that. They will do it. But that trade has to be there. That's got to be there. And they've got to go find it, and they've got to leave no stone unturned. And that's, again, true of any team. It should not be for lack of trying. But we have to remember there is a big picture to all of this, beyond even just whether or not the value of an individual trade is a good move. There's a much bigger game in all of that we have to keep in mind. And I can say that there are a number of teams that don't make a move, and then they wind up being glad they didn't because something better comes along later. Now, sometimes it doesn't, and you can say the team sat out too long and it really hurt them. There's both ways you can go with this. But Lakers specific, they got to be sure whatever they do is right, because they can only do it once. They can only trade their expirings once. They can only trade their future first round pick once. All right, let's see what else we've got here. Tex said, hey, Trev, thanks for doing the Q&A with us. Oh, over on Discord? Yeah, that was fun. That was a good time. Where do you see Quentin Grimes landing this season or the season after if he takes the qualifying offer? I think he winds up coming to terms on a deal with Philly. I think the challenge with Philly is they kind of already have his replacements there, right? With what they've got with VJ Edgecombe in town. And of course, Jared McCain, if he's healthy, like they already have the pieces there. So I don't know that they want to commit too long-term to Quentin Grimes, but I think they ultimately will come to terms on a deal. They'll come up with something. I think Philly wants to go win right now. And I think Philly understands that you can't rely on Paul George and Joel Embiid to play. I mean, my God, can you even rely on them to play 50 games? Probably not. So your best case scenario, if you're Philly, is to get to the postseason and then hope that Embiid and George are healthy for the postseason. And you're going to need guys to get you there. And I think Quentin Grimes can very much be a guy to get them there. I think Tyrese Maxey, I think VJ Edgecombe. I mean, we already saw some pretty exciting stuff from him, but Jared McCain as well. These are all guys that can help get them there. Quentin Grimes certainly factors into that. That's what the 76ers are going to be looking for. Guys that can get them to the postseason. So I do think Grimes ultimately stays with the 76ers. I'm just expecting more like a 2-year deal, because if you're Philly, you're saying in 2 years, what's VJ? Is he ready to just be the guy now? And by the guy, I mean the guy on the perimeter. What about Jared McCain? What's that looking like? Are we really trying to flip this team in a couple of years and just go around those three guys, McCain, Edgecombe, and Maxey? And now, unfortunately, they've got Joel Embiid. Maybe, I mean, God, it's unfortunate that this is where we're at, but maybe one of the worst contracts in the NBA now. 4 years left on his deal. $67 million in the final year. I mean, he may be done playing in back-to-backs. There's a real good chance that we have seen the best of Joel Embiid already. His best days are already behind him. He's 31 years old, and his best days are already behind him. Ouch. And then Paul George already dealing with an injury, and he's got 3 years under contract. I understand why Philly did what they did, going and getting PG. I understand why Philly gave Joel Embiid the contract extension. I mean, he was an MVP. But man, I would have to imagine if Philly had some opportunity, if they had some way to just erase those contracts, if you could amnesty players still, man, that might be tempting. It might be painful, but man, Philly, they could have a very bright future around Maxey, Edgecombe, Jared McCain, and building out their young roster from there. And I just wonder how many years that's going to be set back by having Embiid and Paul George on the books if they can't stay healthy. And I hope that's not what happens. I hope these guys get healthy. I hope they surprise us all and both guys play 70 games this season. That would be fantastic. I just don't think it's all that realistic at this point. All right, what else do we have here in the chat? And again, guys, this is very much a ask me anything kind of session here today. We're going into we are in August here. There have been some news bits out. I talked about it a little bit with Kaminga, talked about it a little bit with Giddey. We do have, again, the schedule release in full is going to be coming up. Oh, there was a little bit actually on the schedule, and that's that Sacramento through a Sacramento. You kind of piece the schedule together by hearing from different teams. But here's something that was interesting. So we know the Lakers are going to play opening night against the Golden State Warriors. We know they're going to play Christmas Day against the Houston Rockets. Now we know another game that's on their schedule. We also know they're playing the Mavs at the end of November as part of the NBA Cup. And now we know that they will play on the road in Sacramento on Sunday, the 26th. So the 21st, they will open the season against the Warriors. The 26th, they will be on the road against Sacramento, which that rings a bell. Was that their schedule for last year too? Did they do the same thing last year? Let me look. I could have sworn they went to Sacramento. Oh, they did play Sacramento. It was their third game of the season, but they were at home. So you see the way the NBA can kind of recycle things sometimes. But there's another game that we know. And again, the full schedule is reportedly coming out on Thursday. And of course, we will break that down here on the Basketball Bulletin. Let's see what else we've got here. People in the chat talking about Andrew Wiggins. It's sounding like, and there was some reporting on this today too, the Miami Heat are just going to hang on to Andrew Wiggins. It sounded like that's going to be the case, that they did have some conversations via trade, but ultimately they're going to hang on to him and not move him. They expect him to be back. They just weren't getting the kind of value they wanted, and teams weren't willing to give up, a ton in order to get him. So, for example, here it is. This is from Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. This season, the Heat were willing to discuss trade scenarios involving Andrew Wiggins. Several teams expressed interest in the former NBA champion and all-star wing. Bucks were one of the teams to inquire, but the Heat ultimately kept him. If they were willing to deal him to receive an impact player, along with an upcoming first-round pick before 2028. That's what they wanted. Teams continue to monitor the Heat to see how they will handle Tyler Herro's upcoming extension window. So let's talk about that for a minute. But if that was the asking price for Wiggins, I get why he's still with the Heat. They want a win now player. They want a player that can help them right now, plus a 2027 or 2026 first round pick. That's a lot for Andrew Wiggins, who has salary flexibility or has salary on the books for next year because he has a $30 million player option for next year. So they're asking for a lot for Andrew Wiggins. With that being the case, that makes sense why he's still with the Heat and why teams haven't met that asking price. Again, I think that's a lot for Andrew Wiggins. If it's depending on the player, obviously, but an instant impact player plus a first for Andrew Wiggins, who also, so not only do you have to be willing to give up that stuff, an instant impact player plus a first round pick, but you also have to be willing to pay Andrew Wiggins $30 million next year. So think about that. You have to give up a first round pick plus a player that can play right now for the privilege of paying Andrew Wiggins $30 million next year. It makes sense why Wiggins is still in Miami. Now, when we talk about the Tyler Herro, and maybe that changes. Maybe a team becomes so desperate for wing help that they go pay that. I don't know. But the Tyler Herro situation, he is extension eligible. He's in that kind of danger zone contract where I look at these guys that are 30 million plus, and I say, are these guys able to be the second best player on a good team? Is there that upside with Tyler Herro? Because that's what I'm looking for. If I'm going to pay a guy 35 million plus, I want the potential that the guy can outperform the contract. And in order for that player to do that, they're going to need to be the second best player on a good team, or at least have the upside of being that. If you're going to give a guy 35 million plus is probably the right number to talk about. So if that's what you're going to give Tyler Herro, you need to feel like he can be that, because otherwise you're just paying him for what he is. And there's only downside, right? He either lives up to the contract or he does not. There is no he exceeds the contract if you don't think he can be the second best player on a good team when we're talking about contracts at that level. So if I'm going to give that kind of money to somebody, I want to feel like there's at least a chance that that player can exceed the value of the contract, because there's always downside. In sports, there's always downside. There's always a chance that a player is going to get a contract and they're going to get hurt, or they're going to go into a slump. They're not going to shoot well. There's always downside. There's always the potential. Look, KCP, we thought was a great signing for Orlando last year. He went into a shooting slump, a very prolonged shooting slump. Some of that we can attribute to Orlando's struggles creating on the offensive end. Did they create good looks for him? No. They were terrible creating looks for anybody. They were the worst three-point shooting team in the NBA last season for a reason. But nonetheless, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope we thought was a good value signing, and it turned out he was not. There's always downside on these contracts. But what you want is there to also be upside, the chance the player can outperform the value of the contract. So if Miami is going to commit that money to Tyler Herro, that tells teams that they are going and trying to win right now, and they do think Tyler Herro can be that next guy. If they don't, then that also tells teams that, you know what, maybe Miami is really going the cap space route for 2027, is really going to go and try to go be a player then and sign a bunch of free agents. And so what Miami does with Tyler Herro will be really important to revealing what they want to do. Do they want to be players in free agency in 2027? Or do they believe that Tyler Herro can be one of the guys for them if we're going with what's become pretty standard around the NBA, which is the 2-star and depth roster build? Is that what Miami sees in Tyler Herro or not? And that's what we're going to find out. So teams are monitoring that, because if the answer is no, if Tyler Herro says, I want $35 million a season, I want $40 million a season, and the Miami Heat don't think the upside is there on that kind of contract, do they then look to trade him? That's the real question here. Do they then look to trade him? And that will be revealing with what Miami's looking to go do. An amnesty clause every 2 to 3 years would be good for the league. I don't know, though. Would it? I think in general, we're starting to see an NBA that is behaving from a front office perspective in a much more responsible way. You see how many contracts are being given out that now have non-guaranteed money. You're seeing how many contracts are being given out that now have team control. Now, it could be just the economics of this offseason, of this market, where there was very, very little free agency money out there, and the players that are out there are not anything to really write home about. Perhaps that is a factor in all of this. But you look at Duncan Robinson's contract, $16.8 million. Ouch, that's a lot. Yeah, but look, $2 million guaranteed next year, $0 guaranteed the year after that. Is he going to see the $30 million remaining here? Probably not. Now, maybe he shoots lights out this season, and then Detroit just says, okay, you're actually worth it. Maybe that happens, but pretty decent chance that they don't pick up these years. There's flexibility there one way or another, though. If he does pan out, let's say he goes and shoots 45% from three this season, not impossible, then Detroit just says, cool, okay, we'll pay you $16 million next year. He does it again, cool, we'll pay you $15 million next year. You're worth it. He shoots 36% from three. They say, nah, see ya. They've got that flexibility. We're seeing teams already adjust to the new collective bargaining agreement and put in more options, more player or more team-friendly deals. And so I don't know that an amnesty clause is even needed. Now, maybe, again, this changes when there's better players available in free agency and there's more money available in free agency. Maybe the supply and demand dynamics change this, and we see less of the team-friendly deals coming out there. And if that's the case, then it's a new conversation to have. But based on the summer that we just saw, in terms of the contracts that were given out, I think the NBA is moving in a positive direction in terms of how teams are being built and the caution with which they're being built with. Teams are more concerned with the optionality than ever before. They want the ability to pivot. They want the ability to not be stuck with bad contracts because of how devastating bad contracts are under this current collective bargaining agreement. So I would argue that we don't need an amnesty clause, because an amnesty clause bails you out from bad decisions. We're seeing teams make less bad decisions than I think ever before right now. I think we are heading in the right direction there. Way worse for the players. Oh, yeah, for sure. Way worse for them. No question. Worse for the players. But from a team building perspective, we are seeing players or teams really be careful with how they spend their money. Bad contracts with injuries are a team killer. Yeah, absolutely. Bad contracts and injuries. And injuries will always be. That will always be a tough spot to be in when a player gets injured. But that's just the risk that's inherent with all sports, right? That's what happens. Do the 49ers wish they still had Brandon Ayuk? Of course. Of course. And maybe he comes back midseason. I don't know. Will Chris Godwin be able to start the season for the Bucs? Maybe not. And they just signed him to a new deal. Does that hurt? 100%. It happens. I mean, the Celtics, Gordon Hayward, first game for them. His foot's pointing the wrong way. That's just inherent with sports. Injuries are possible. And it's something that teams have to factor into these contracts and the valuation of them. Philly could use a couple of amnesties right now. Well, that is true. That is true. And I would say, really, when we look at the NBA's collective bargaining agreement, I would say that restricted free agency should be in the crosshairs of the Players Association. And we're seeing, I think, a very extreme example of why it's so bad for players right now with what's playing out with Giddey and Kaminga and all those guys. That should be the primary focus of the Players Association, because these guys that wind up in restricted free agency, it's too easy for teams to scare off suitors. It's too difficult for players to find a fair deal in these situations. It's tough. All right, let's see what else we've got coming in here in the chat. Once again, folks, if you have not subscribed yet to the Basketball Bulletin, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. Turn on those notifications as well. We appreciate all of you, all the support that we've had here. Wasn't sure what this would ultimately become when we started this. And now we're going on, I think, a year since we really, it'll be a year next month since we really got going under the current model for Basketball Bulletin. And again, it cannot say how thrilled I am with the growth that we've seen here on the channel. So really excited about this and everything moving forward. Where does Al Horford go? I still think he winds up in Golden State. Although it was interesting, it was noted today, I believe it was by ESPN, that Al Horford, their potential is still there for him to retire, that he might retire. I think it's Golden State or retirement, that if things get shut down with Golden State because of something going on with Kaminga, he could very well wind up retiring. I don't think it will, though. I think that Golden State, they're being very cautious. They don't want to accidentally hard cap themselves or anything like that, especially at the first apron. And whenever the Kaminga situation gets resolved, they will pay Al Horford. I do expect him to be a Golden State Warrior. Where does Russ go? So that was actually addressed and something I wanted to talk about. I'm glad you brought that up. That was addressed by ESPN today. And it was noted that Russell Westbrook, who spent the first 11 years of his career with Oklahoma City, by the way, how crazy is it that Kevin Durant has to go back to OKC to see them get their first ring ever that he couldn't provide? Wow. That's some crazy booking there for opening night. He won't be returning to Denver. The all-time leader in triple doubles won't continue the trend of storybook homecomings, a la Damian Lillard and Chris Paul. The Thunder will hang his jersey in the Raptors after he retires, but they don't have room on their roster. So he's not going back to OKC. So league sources, according to Tim McMahon, consider the Kings the most likely destination for Russell Westbrook. Hallelujah. I've been begging for this. Who will turn 37 the first month. If that's the case, Westbrook would likely come off the bench again and share ball handling duties with Dennis Schroeder. I have been begging just because, my God. I mean, folks, the chaos of Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Russell Westbrook, Dennis Schroeder, Sabonis, and then Keegan Murray camped out in the corner, needing to develop and probably wondering, he's sitting over there looking at his watch. How long is it going to be till I touch the ball again? Like, this is, oh man, I don't know what the Kings are doing. I was not against them signing DeMar DeRozan or getting that deal done. I thought there was a path for that to work. Obviously, it didn't. They badly need a true point guard. They got Dennis Schroeder. He's not really a true point guard. They maybe get Russell Westbrook. He's not that either. They need a setup guy. And Russ, I think, is more of a setup guy than Dennis Schroeder is, but still, they're both kind of score first guys. This team has so many players who their default setting, when all else fails, is going to be to shoot the ball. I just can't see any way this works. I can't see any way this works. And I think the Kings need to make significant change. They you need at least two of Zach LaVine, Sabonis, DeRozan, Malik Monk. I didn't even mention Malik Monk. To go elsewhere. You've got too many guys who need the ball and need to score. And that is their base skill set. There'll be nights where the Kings are going to put up like 140 points, 130 points. Like they'll get multiple guys that are hot. And Zach LaVine's pulling up from 40 feet and just draining shots. He's an insane. 45% from three, I think he was last season. Absurd. Great season. That went under the radar because the teams he was playing for. There will be nights where the Kings offense just goes crazy. But there's going to be nights too where they're struggling to create anything, where they're struggling to stop anybody. And guys you've got square pegs being put in round holes here. That's going to be a problem for Sacramento. If any of the West teams that you look at as kind of playoff adjacent, any team that was going to drop out, I think Sacramento is my pick without factoring in injuries. Somebody will get incredibly injured and wind up dropping out of the race. But I think Sacramento is the team that drops out because these pieces, they don't fit. And I feel bad for Keegan Murray and Keon Ellis because these are pieces that could make some sense, but they need to make some moves here. Sacramento does. Phoenix was already out of the mix, but otherwise they'd be another team that Phoenix, they're looking discombobulated, at least makes sense because they made big moves over the summer. Sacramento, it's like they made their big move during the season when they traded De'Aaron Fox, and I can't say they've really recovered from that still. The roster is still a mess. I get why Phoenix is a mess. They just traded Kevin Durant, right? They just did that. They just waived Bradley Beal. So the pieces they've got coming in, you don't necessarily expect them all to fit perfectly. Sacramento had work to do this summer and didn't really work out. Didn't really work out. All right. Where do I think Malik Monk gets traded? The problem is I think NBA teams aren't valuing sixth man scorer archetypes as much as they used to. But some team that isn't eyeing 2027 cap space, because that's rumored to be a big part of the problem for Golden State, why they're not in on Malik Monk, who I think would be a fine fit for them. But they already have Buddy Hield, so there's some overlap there. And then Monk has salary into 2027, and teams don't want that. Smokey said, I'm with Jason Timpf on how to build up the team out. And what was his thoughts on that? Building around Luka, and everybody else needs to be. Yeah, that's if that's the basis of it. Yeah, I think that's pretty standard, right? Your whole goal is going to be to build around Luka. Everything is going to be, if you're a Laker, everything is going to be through the lens of what's the best fit for Luka. And that's it. And I believe that's the way the team has moved forward. They've talked about how the average age of their players has dropped significantly. They're trying to find guys who line up with Luka, period. Here's a good question. So when did you start your YouTube journey? Been a long time fan here. Well, so YouTube at first was just kind of like I had the Lakers Nation podcast going, and then YouTube was like, well, all right, I guess we might as well throw the podcast up there too. It wasn't like anything specific. That was a goal of, okay, we're going to start doing this on TV. I don't even remember when we first started. I think we started doing live streams on camera, where I think I even did them from my kitchen table and it started out just on Facebook. And that was years ago. I mean, we're talking like 2018, 2017, I think, something like that. And then eventually we just started putting the podcast up on YouTube. I wasn't even running it or anything. But it was just I would send in the podcast, they'd post it to YouTube, and that was that. And as time went on, I started looking more and more at it as a real avenue to move towards. And so it was kind of a gradual transition. And now most of the work I do, while I still do a lot of stuff, obviously in the audio side with podcasts, but everything is first video and then audio. Whereas originally it was the other way around, where the audio format was the king, and then YouTube, the video format was just kind of something that we were, oh, well, since we've already got the audio, let's just throw it out there. Over time, that has shifted, obviously, to most things are now video focused, and then the audio also gets put out. And I shouldn't say the audio is not a focus, because it absolutely is. We still have a lot of podcast listeners. And by the way, I should use that to mention that Basketball Bulletin is now available as a podcast format as well. You can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. But um, it was a slow transition towards that, and then eventually kind of recognizing the power that video has and moving in that direction. So it's been quite a long time. In fact, this is now 10 years that I've been doing this. Not specifically podcasting, but 10 years that I've been in sports media on a professional level. So it's been a very long kind of and slow transition in that direction. All right, let's see what else we've got here. Surprise team of the season? Oh, that's a good question. Surprise team of the season. Maybe it's not a huge surprise, but I think Orlando can be a really interesting team. I love the Desmond Bane addition. I think he fits exactly what they need. And I think their defense was already so good. They were legitimately one of the best defenses in the NBA. The problem, why they weren't winning more, was just they shot horribly from three and they couldn't create. Did they address that enough with Des Bane and Tyus Jones joining? I think so. I think Des was exactly what they needed. They paid a lot for him, but I do think Orlando could be a surprise team to move up significantly in the East. We also have to remember that as much as we focus on the Pelicans as being the team that was just ridiculously, absurdly injured, and they were, Orlando had some bizarre stuff going on too. I mean, what was it? We had right oblique strains, I think, for both Franz Wagner and Paulo Banchero. Like, it's increasingly rare, or exceptionally rare, for one player on your team to get an oblique strain like that, but two players to get knocked out for significant time by that. Mo Wagner at the center spot getting knocked out for a length of time. I do think Orlando is a team that could surprise us and wind up, I won't say at the top of the East, but they could wind up being a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference. And I think in part because it's Orlando, and in part because they made the Desmond Bane trade early in the NBA offseason, so it's not fresh in people's minds, I think they're getting overlooked a little bit. The Blazers could be decent. Yeah, I think so too. I didn't like the Drew Holiday trade for them, but if they are right, because they believe that they can go win right now, that they have a chance to build on how they finished last season. And if they're right in that, then Drew Holiday will be just fine for them, and he'll actually be a really good defensive piece. Health, obviously, you got to be concerned about. And 35 years old, the long-term contract, I still don't love it. But the Blazers, they've got some good young players. Donovan Clingan is ready to take over in the middle. I think they're going to be every night. It's going to be tough in the West. Look, spoiler alert, schedule's coming out on Thursday. Guess what? Every West team is going to have a hard schedule. It's the way it is. That's the West. Every West team is going to have a hard schedule. Detroit, yep. I thought Detroit didn't have as good of a summer as Orlando or Atlanta. Atlanta is getting a lot of buzz, and that's why I didn't mention them. But Atlanta, I thought, had a better summer than Detroit. And they did go head-to-head for Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and Atlanta won that battle. But Detroit also has, I think, a decent amount of organic growth that could come here, particularly when we look at, Jaden Ivey and how injured he was last season. Can he come back and give them a boost? Cade Cunningham is phenomenal. I will continue to pound the drum that Cade Cunningham should be talked about in the same breath as Anthony Edwards. I think he's that good. Is he that next level athlete that Ant is? No, and that's part of why he gets more buzz. But Cade Cunningham is legit. He's very good. So I'm still high on the Pistons. I just think Orlando and Atlanta, in terms of teams that look at the East and say, we have a shot to go right now, I think Atlanta and Orlando had better summers than Detroit did, but it's possible Detroit mitigates that through just pure organic growth. The Duncan Robinson addition, does that replace Malik Beasley? You lost Tim Hardaway Jr. There, you lost some guys, but I do think Detroit's going to be good again next season. East is trash. Yeah, I mean, the NBA pretty much said as much, right? Didn't they? Didn't the NBA pretty much just admit the East sucks? Like, and it's not to say they're not good teams in the East, because there are. But I mean, the Cavs were great last year, 64-win team. They were great. The Knicks, I think, are a compelling team. They're always a fun watch. There's good team. I'm going to watch the hell out of the Eastern Conference. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But the NBA opening night chose to omit the East. They just left the Eastern Conference out completely and said, nah, it's not worth it. And you could say, well, all right, but their champion is a Midwest team in OKC. So we're talking about time zones. Like if the champ was a Pacific team, maybe that makes it, the Lakers are going to play opening night, but it's a Midwest team. So you can kind of hit the Eastern Conference time zone too by using OKC as your opening game that day. But it wasn't just coincidence that they also, on Christmas Day, used the earliest time slot, which is, of any of the Christmas Day games, it's like the biggest throwaway time slot. And not that any of them really are truly throwaways, but it's usually the least viewed because everybody's busy opening presents and stuff. But that's the game that they gave to the Eastern Conference. And every other game throughout the rest of the day, all 4 remaining games are Western Conference teams, solely Western Conference teams, no East teams. The NBA basically said through their scheduling, yeah, we don't have a lot of faith in the Eastern Conference right now. And I did this the other day. I sat down and I made a list of like stars in the NBA, West and East, like everybody that would fit all-star adjacent and up. And I'm not kidding you. Like the list of just talent in the West, it was double that of the East. And there's good players and there's a good team in the East. But yeah, the NBA said what they think about the quality of the Eastern Conference. And frankly, it's not going to change, because it would have to be put to a vote. Maybe if and when we get expansion, they will drastically redraw the lines and change everything and change the way the whole system operates. But right now, if you were to go and say you need, I think it's it's either a 3/4 or 2/3 majority that you need to vote to make this significant of a change. I don't recall which it is off the top of my head, but none of the East teams will vote to do away with conferences. None of them will want to give up the advantage that they have where they don't have to win nearly as many games or play nearly as many difficult teams in the East in order to make the playoffs. So none of them are going to vote for that. And if it ever flips, and it's been this way for decades now, but if it ever flips the other way and the East is the stronger conference, then the West teams won't vote for it. So finding the window to actually change the conference system in the NBA is very difficult. Is it time to find out how good Trae Young is with the additions and growth of this roster? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to be finding out just how good Trae Young is or is not. And I am excited for that. He's got a team that is really built around him. And we're going to find out what he can be. I like the way the Hawks have built out their roster. I think it's going to be really good. I think they're going to be a tough team. I think if you're ever going to mitigate his defensive concerns, the build that Atlanta has is one that will allow him to do that. And I think they need to pay him. I'm surprised that the Hawks are seemingly so willing to go into free agency this next year with Trae Young having the ability to walk away for nothing. That's surprising to me. But then again, if you're Trae, you say, well, all right, then I'm going to go make all NBA and I'm going to be eligible for a 5-year deal and you're going to have to pay me even more. So this could wind up working in Trae's favor. That could definitely happen. The West has got the number 1 pick the last 3 years. That also hasn't helped, right? They didn't get it 2 years ago because Zachary Sachet went to the Hawks, but it hasn't helped that Wemby and Cooper Flag both wound up on Western Conference teams. That didn't help. Like your maybe we'll see what they obviously become, but your ideally generational stars coming in both went to Western Conference teams. That doesn't help the discrepancy either. The Hawks have Dyson Daniels to take care of. Yeah, they do. And it could be they want to figure that out first, but he's extension eligible. The Great Barrier Thief obviously had a great season for them last year. That's another factor in everything the Hawks are doing. They've got to get that sorted as well. All right, everybody. I'll do one more, and then I'll probably get out of here. Again, appreciate all your support here on the Basketball Bulletin. Please make sure you do subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed yet. Let's go. Do I think Utah makes a trade? I don't know that they make one before the season, but I would be surprised if they completely sat out the season in terms of trades. It's very clear they're trying to build for the future. I do think they buy out Kevin Love. I think that's a move they make. That's not a trade, but I think they buy out Kevin Love. I think that makes a lot of sense for them and for Kevin Love as well. But I would expect the Jazz to be active on the trade front. They have some players that are still valuable. Maybe they change their minds on Walker Kessler, decide to move him. But Lauri Markkanen is another guy to keep an eye on because we're getting to a point where, like, what are we doing if we're Utah? Are we really pushing to win right now? Markkanen's now into his age 28 season. Like, the clock is kind of ticking there. Not that 28 is old, because it's not, but how far away are you if you're Utah? And by the way, I like what the Utah Jazz did in the draft. I like them telling Ace Bailey, no, we think you're a top-end talent. We don't care if you don't want to be here. We're picking you anyway, and you're going to like it. But by the time these guys are ready to win, what is Lauri Markkanen at that point? And so a Markkanen trade maybe wouldn't surprise me, but I could question, based on the season that he had last year, is he even a positive value right now? I don't know. I don't know that he truly is. And so that's going to be a concern, I think, for the Jazz. They need him to play well and then maybe look to move him. Am I going live tonight for Lakers Nation? Yep, 9:00 Pacific time. We'll be live talking just Lakers this evening. All right, everybody. I appreciate y'all for joining over here on the Basketball Bulletin. Please make sure you do subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. I was going to do a couple of little news videos and stuff, but decided, you know what? Let's just go live. Haven't done one of these recently. I do want to do these more often, do some more live shows here on the channel, but appreciate all the support that we've received here. Till next time, everybody. See ya and stay safe.